Now imagine being given a single rule: never, under any circumstances, open the box. You don't know what's inside. You're told you never will. But you can hear it sometimes, in the dead of night. Whispers, scratching, something alive and waiting in the darkness. How long could you resist? One woman couldn't. And when she finally lifted that lid, every horror humanity would ever face came screaming into the world. If you dared to discover what was in Pandora's box, hit subscribe and comment. Could you resist forbidden knowledge? This is the story of the first woman, the beautiful weapon, and the curiosity that damned us all. Zeus sat on his throne, his face dark with fury that had been simmering for years. Prometheus had stolen fire. Humanity had risen from beasts to something dangerously close to rivals. They built cities now, forged weapons, created art. They were becoming too much like gods. And Zeus, who had overthrown his own father, understood the danger of those who rise too high. Prometheus suffered for his crime, Zeus said to the assembled Olympians. But humanity? They enjoy their stolen gift, warm and content, thinking themselves clever. This cannot stand. We need a punishment that will remind them of their place, something elegant. Athena, goddess of wisdom, tilted her head. You want to destroy them? No. Zeus's smile was cold and calculated. I want them to destroy themselves, and I know exactly how. He called forth Hephaestus, the divine smith, god of the forge and fire. Create me a woman, Zeus commanded, not like the crude mortals who crawl across the earth. Make her perfect. Make her irresistible. Make her something no man could possibly refuse. Hephaestus descended to his workshop beneath the mountains and began his greatest and most terrible work. He shaped her from clay and water, his massive hands molding features of impossible beauty. When he breathed life into her, she opened eyes that held the depth of oceans and the innocence of dawn. But she was empty, a vessel waiting to be filled. One by one, the gods came to give their gifts, or their curses, depending on how you looked at it. Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty, kissed her forehead and granted her a face that would make men weep, a grace that would haunt their dreams forever. You will be desire incarnate, Aphrodite whispered. No mortal will be able to look away. Athena, conflicted but obedient to Zeus's will, gave her cleverness and skill in weaving, music, and all domestic arts. You will be the perfect companion, she said, though her voice carried a note of sadness. Apollo granted her a voice like honey and sunlight, able to soothe or seduce with equal ease. Hermes, trickster god, messenger of Olympus, gave her something more dangerous: curiosity, a mind that questioned, that wondered, that could never be satisfied with simple answers. And along with curiosity, he gave her cunning and a silver tongue capable of persuasion and deceit. Her name, Zeus declared, shall be Pandora, all gifted, for she carries the gifts of every god. She stood before them, this first woman, perfect in every way, beautiful, intelligent, charming, everything humanity could ever desire. And then Zeus presented her with a jar, though history would mistranslate it as a box. It was large, sealed with wax and bound with bronze, its surface inscribed with warnings in languages that predated human civilization. This, Zeus said, his voice heavy with false solemnity, you must never, ever open. Do you understand? No matter what you hear, no matter how curious you become, this jar must remain sealed. Pandora, only moments old, looked at the jar with her newly awakened eyes. What's inside? Zeus smiled. That is the one question you must never ask, the one answer you must never seek. And with that, he sent her down to earth, a living trap, baited with beauty and armed with curiosity, carrying in her hands the doom of all mankind. Epimetheus, whose name meant afterthought, was everything his brother Prometheus was not. Where Prometheus saw the future, Epimetheus only understood the present. Where Prometheus calculated and planned, Epimetheus felt and acted. He was kind, gentle, and catastrophically impulsive. His brother had warned him in those final moments before being dragged to the Caucasus. Zeus will send you something, a gift, he'll call it. No matter how beautiful, no matter how tempting, refuse it. Refuse everything that comes from Olympus. They do not forgive, and they do not forget. Epimetheus had sworn he would remember. Then Pandora appeared at his door. She stood in the sunlight like a vision made flesh, her hair catching the light like spun gold, her eyes holding depths that promised understanding, companionship, love. She smiled at him, shy, uncertain, achingly vulnerable, and Epimetheus forgot every warning his brother had ever given him. "I'm lost," she said, her voice like music. "I don't know where I am or where I'm supposed to go. The gods sent me down, but they didn't tell me why. I'm frightened." It was a lie, or was it? Pandora herself didn't know anymore. The gods had filled her with so many conflicting purposes that she couldn't tell where their design ended and her own thoughts began. But the fear? That was real. She had been alive for mere hours, thrust into a world she didn't understand, carrying a burden she couldn't name. Epimetheus, looking at this perfect, frightened woman, did what his nature demanded. He offered shelter, protection, comfort. Within a week, they were married. The ceremony was beautiful. Humanity, grateful for Prometheus's gift of fire, came to honor his brother, bringing offerings of roasted meat and wine. They danced around bonfires, sang songs of love and hope, and celebrated what seemed like a blessing from the gods themselves. No one noticed that Zeus, watching from Olympus, was smiling. Pandora moved into Epimetheus's home, and for a time there was genuine happiness. She learned to be human, to cook, to weave, to laugh at simple jokes and cry at sad stories. Epimetheus was patient and kind, teaching her about the world she'd been dropped into. She found herself caring for him, perhaps even loving him, which made what she carried even more unbearable. Because she had brought the jar with her, the sealed container that was never supposed to be opened. It sat in the corner of their home, covered with cloth, ignored by Epimetheus, who assumed it was just part of her dowry. Some family heirloom, perhaps. Nothing important. But Pandora couldn't ignore it. At first, it was just an awareness, a knowledge that it was there in the room, sealed and secret. Easy enough to push from her mind during the day when she was busy with life and learning and love. But at night, in the darkness, when Epimetheus slept beside her and the world was quiet, that's when she heard it. Whispers, so faint she thought she might be imagining them. Soft scratching sounds as if something inside was trying to get out or trying to get her attention. Sometimes she thought she heard voices, speaking in languages that predated human speech, promising things she couldn't quite understand. "Open us," the whispers seemed to say. "Free us. Don't you want to know? Don't you want to see?" She would lie awake, staring at the covered jar across the room, her heart hammering, her curiosity, that gift from Hermes, burning like fever in her mind. What was inside? Why had Zeus forbidden her to look? Was it treasure, secrets, something dangerous, or something wonderful? The not knowing was torture. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. And with each passing night, the whispers grew louder, more insistent, more impossible to ignore. Epimetheus noticed her distraction. "Are you all right?" he asked one morning, seeing the dark circles under her eyes. "You seem troubled." "I'm fine," she lied, forcing a smile. "Just adjusting. It's all so new." But she wasn't fine. The curiosity was eating her alive from the inside, consuming her thoughts, invading her dreams. The jar called to her constantly now, a siren song of forbidden knowledge that she couldn't escape no matter how hard she tried. Zeus had designed her well, too well, and the trap was about to spring. It happened on a night when the moon was dark and the stars seemed to hide behind clouds, as if even the heavens didn't want to witness what was about to unfold. Epimetheus had fallen asleep hours ago, exhausted from working in the fields. His breathing was steady, peaceful, completely unaware of the war raging inside his wife's mind. Pandora lay beside him, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, but all she could see was the jar. All she could hear were the whispers, louder now than they'd ever been, no longer subtle or faint, but screaming inside her skull. "Open! Open! Open!" Her hands trembled, her heart raced. The curiosity that Hermes had planted in her soul had grown into an obsession, a madness, a physical pain that made her want to tear her own skin off just to make it stop. What harm could one look do? Just a tiny peek inside, just enough to satisfy this burning need to know. And then she'd seal it again. No one would ever find out. The contents would remain safe. She would finally have peace. She rose from the bed like a sleepwalker, her feet carrying her across the room without conscious thought. Her hands reached for the cloth covering the jar, pulled it away. The bronze seal gleamed in the dim starlight filtering through the window. The whispers became a chorus, a symphony of voices promising revelation, knowledge, power, truth. "You deserve to know," they sang. "You were created with curiosity for a reason. This is your purpose. This is what you were made for. Open us. Free us." Her fingers touched the seal. It was warm, almost alive, pulsing with something that might have been eagerness or might have been malevolence. One twist. That's all it would take. One turn of her wrist, and every question would be answered, every mystery solved. The torture would end. Zeus had forbidden it, but Zeus had also given her the curiosity to question why, had made her too intelligent to simply obey without understanding, had crafted her to be exactly this, unable to resist, perfectly designed to fail. Was this her fault? Or his? Did it even matter anymore? Her hand tightened on the seal, began to turn. The wax cracked with a sound like breaking bones. And somewhere on Olympus, Zeus leaned forward on his throne, waiting for the moment his revenge would finally be complete. She's one turn away from catastrophe, one moment from unleashing something that can never be taken back. If you're dying to know what happens next, smash that like button and tell us in the comments, if you were Pandora, knowing opening it might destroy everything, could you stop yourself? Let's witness the moment curiosity broke the world. The seal broke. For one frozen heartbeat, nothing happened. Pandora stared at the jar in her hands, the lid loose now, ready to be lifted. The whispers had stopped. The world held its breath. Then she lifted the lid. What emerged was not treasure, not knowledge, Not anything her mortal mind could have possibly imagined or prepared for. Darkness erupted from the jar like a scream made visible, not the gentle darkness of night, but something ancient and malevolent, thick as smoke and cold as the void between stars. It poured out in writhing tendrils, filling the room, and within that darkness came the horrors. Disease came first, a twisted, skeletal thing with hollow eyes and fingers like needles, trailing pestilence in its wake. Where it touched the walls, they began to rot. Where its breath fell, the air itself grew poisonous. War followed. A massive figure, wreathed in blood and screaming metal, its form shifting between soldier and monster, carrying weapons that dripped with the gore of battles not yet fought. It roared with the voices of every warrior who would ever die in rage and futility. Famine crawled out next, thin as starvation itself, its ribs protruding through translucent skin, its mouth an eternal scream of hunger that could never be satisfied. Plants withered at its presence. The very concept of abundance fled before it. Then came the psychological torments, abstract horrors that were somehow worse than the physical ones. Envy slithered forth, beautiful and poisonous, whispering comparisons that would drive humanity to destroy what others possessed rather than build their own. Greed erupted like a swarm of grasping hands, never satisfied, always reaching, teaching mortals to hoard and hunger for more even as they drowned in plenty. Hatred boiled out, not hot rage but cold, calculating loathing that would teach people to despise their neighbors, their families, themselves. Lies came as a silver-tongued shadow, making truth impossible to distinguish from deception, ensuring that humanity would never fully trust again. Fear manifested as 1,000 eyes watching from the darkness, planting paranoia and terror in every heart. Pain arrived not as one entity, but as countless variations. Physical agony, emotional suffering, the grief of loss, the torture of memory, the anticipation of future hurt. Old age crept out slowly, bent and withered, carrying the weight of time that would now drag humanity toward inevitable decay. Death itself stood at the threshold, not as a single being, but as the shadow of all these horrors combined, the final promise that every living thing would end, and more. So many more. Every conceivable suffering, every possible torment, every nightmare that would ever plague humanity came streaming from that jar in an endless, horrible tide. Pandora screamed. She tried to close the lid, her hands fumbling desperately, but the creatures were too fast, too eager for freedom after eons of imprisonment. They flew past her, through her, around her, some taking physical form, others remaining as concepts, ideas, infections that would spread through humanity like plague. They burst through the windows and doors, spreading across the world at impossible speed. She could hear them laughing, shrieking, singing songs of suffering in languages that hurt to comprehend. Epimetheus woke to chaos. "What have you done?" he gasped, seeing the darkness, the horrors, his wife standing at the center of it all with the open jar in her trembling hands. "I couldn't stop," Pandora sobbed, tears streaming down her face. "I couldn't. The whispers. I had to know." But it was too late for explanations. The damage was already spreading across the earth like wildfire. In distant villages, people who had gone to sleep healthy woke up coughing blood. Children who had laughed the day before suddenly eyed each other with suspicion and envy. Neighbors who had been friends for decades found reasons to quarrel, to fight, to kill. Crops that had been growing strong suddenly withered. Animals turned vicious. The very air seemed heavier, colder, poisoned with malice. Humanity's golden age, their brief paradise gifted by Prometheus's fire, was ending in real time, replaced by a world of suffering that would never fully heal. And Pandora stood at the center of it all, the empty jar in her hands, understanding with horrible clarity that she had been designed for exactly this moment. Zeus had crafted her perfectly, not to resist the temptation, but to guarantee she would succumb to it. She had never had a choice. From the moment of her creation, she had been a weapon aimed at humanity's heart. And she had fired herself. The jar was empty. Every horror had escaped. Humanity's innocence was shattered forever, replaced by suffering that would echo through every generation until the end of time. But wait, something was still inside. One last thing, trapped at the bottom of the jar, beating like a heart, glowing faintly in the darkness. What could possibly remain after all that horror? And why had Zeus left it there? Hit that like button if you need to know what survived the apocalypse, and comment below. Do you think what remained was mercy or one final cruelty? Let's discover the last secret of Pandora's box. Pandora stood frozen, the jar still clutched in her trembling hands. Around her, the world was transforming into something darker, crueler. Through the windows, she could hear distant screams, the sounds of violence erupting in villages that had known only peace. Her perfect creation had become her perfect nightmare. "Drop it," Epimetheus said, his voice hollow with shock and grief. "Pandora, drop the jar. There's nothing left. Wait." Her voice was barely a whisper. "There's something, I can feel it, something still inside." She shouldn't look. She knew that with absolute certainty. Looking had caused all of this. Her curiosity had damned the entire world. Whatever remained in that jar was probably something even worse than what had already escaped. Some final horror Zeus had saved for last, the cruelest punishment designed to make humanity beg for death. But the light at the bottom of the jar pulsed gently, almost warmly. Unlike the cold malevolence of the creatures that had erupted earlier, this presence felt different, smaller, quieter, almost fragile. With shaking hands, Pandora tilted the jar and looked inside. At the very bottom, wings folded, shimmering with soft golden light, was a tiny figure no larger than her hand. It looked up at her with eyes that held neither judgment nor hatred, only a gentle, persistent brightness that refused to be extinguished. "What are you?" Pandora whispered. The figure spoke, and its voice was like the first ray of sunlight after an endless night. "I am Hope." Hope, the one thing Zeus had trapped at the bottom of his weapon, the one thing that had not escaped with all the horrors. "Why?" Epimetheus stepped closer, staring at the small, glowing being. "Why would he put you in there? Why would Zeus trap something like you with all those monsters?" Hope's smile was sad and knowing. "Because I am the cruelest gift of all. Disease will ravage humanity, and I will whisper that they might heal. War will tear them apart, and I will suggest that peace might still be possible. Famine will starve them, and I will promise that the next harvest might be better. Every suffering they endure, I will stand beside them and say, perhaps tomorrow will be different." Pandora felt her heart crack. "So you'll torment them? Make them believe things could improve when they never will?" "No," Hope said gently. "I will give them a reason to continue. Without me, humanity would lie down and die at the first sign of suffering. But with me, they will rebuild. They will try again. They will love even knowing loss is inevitable. They will create beauty even in a world of pain. They will fight for tomorrow even when today is unbearable. The tiny being spread its wings, and the light grew slightly brighter. Zeus thought he was being cruel by including me. He thought hope would be the ultimate torture, always promising, never fully delivering, keeping humanity alive just to suffer more. But he underestimated something crucial. "What?" Pandora asked, tears streaming down her face. "Hope," the small figure said, rising into the air, "is not a promise that things will get better. It's the strength to continue even when they don't. It's not delusion. It's defiance." And with that, hope flew from the jar out into the wounded world, not to erase the horrors that had been released, but to stand beside humanity as they faced them. A small light in the darkness, a quiet voice saying, "You can survive this. You can rebuild. You are stronger than your suffering." In the distance, the screaming continued. The plague spread. The wars raged. The new world of pain was fully born. But now, impossibly, there was also hope. And that changed everything. The dawn came as it always did, but the world it illuminated was forever altered. Pandora and Epimetheus stood at the threshold of their home, looking out at a landscape that seemed darker somehow, even in daylight. The colors were less vibrant. The air carried weight it hadn't before. In the distance, smoke rose from villages where conflicts, concepts humanity had never known, now raged. "They'll hate me," Pandora whispered, her voice broken. "Every human who suffers, every child who falls ill, every person who dies in war or famine, they'll know it's because of me. Because I couldn't control myself, because I was weak." Epimetheus took her hand. His face was drawn with grief, with the knowledge of what his impulsiveness had cost the world by accepting Zeus's gift. "We were both weapons," he said quietly. "You, designed to open it. Me, designed to accept you. Zeus played us both perfectly." It was true, but it didn't make the guilt any lighter. In the months that followed, they watched humanity grapple with their new reality. People fell ill for the first time and didn't understand why their bodies betrayed them. Communities that had lived in harmony found themselves consumed by jealousy and greed, fighting over resources they'd once shared freely. The old began to feel their bones ache, their memories fade, their strength leave them. But something else happened too. They adapted. A healer, watching her child burn with fever, didn't give up. She tried herb after herb, mixture after mixture, failing again and again. But hope whispered in her ear, and she tried once more, and that time the fever broke. Medicine was born from desperation and determination. A farmer, seeing his crops wither from the blight that famine had breathed into the soil, could have laid down and died. Instead, hope suggested he try different seeds, different methods. Agriculture evolved through trial and error and refusal to surrender. When war came to a village, some fled, some fought, some died. But others, inspired by that small light that refused to extinguish, began talking about peace treaties, about negotiation, about finding ways to resolve conflicts without bloodshed. It didn't always work. Often it failed. But sometimes, impossibly, it succeeded. Humanity was suffering, yes, but they were also innovating, creating, persisting. They were becoming something more complex than the innocent creatures who had lived before Pandora's curiosity changed everything. They were becoming survivors, On Olympus, Zeus watched with an expression that might have been satisfaction or might have been uncertainty. His revenge had worked perfectly. Humanity would suffer forever. But they hadn't broken. That small inclusion of hope, meant to torture them with false promises, had instead given them something he hadn't anticipated: resilience. Perhaps, in trying to create the perfect punishment, he had accidentally given humanity their greatest strength. Prometheus, still bearing his scars from the Caucasus, heard the news of Pandora's jar. He said nothing, but those who knew him saw something flicker in his ancient eyes. His brother had been manipulated into accepting Zeus's trap. The woman had been designed to fail. Humanity now suffered in ways they never had before, but they also had fire, and now they had hope. And with those two gifts, one stolen, one accidentally released, humanity had everything they needed to face whatever horrors the gods could throw at them. Pandora never stopped feeling guilty. Every scream she heard, every death she witnessed, she knew was partly her fault. The weight of it never left her. But she also saw the determination in people's eyes, the way they refused to give up even when giving up would have been easier. She had released every evil into the world, but she had also released the one thing that would allow humanity to survive them all. It wasn't redemption, not exactly, but it was something close to purpose, and in the end, perhaps that was enough. Centuries passed, millennia, empires rose and fell, humanity spread across the earth, carrying with them the twin gifts that had defined their existence: fire, stolen by Prometheus, and hope, accidentally released by Pandora. Every generation faced the horrors from that jar. Disease claimed millions. Wars devastated nations. Famine starved entire populations. Greed corrupted the powerful. Envy poisoned relationships. Lies destroyed trust. Fear paralyzed the brave. But every generation also knew hope. The mother who stayed awake all night beside her sick child's bed, believing dawn would bring relief. The soldier who laid down his weapon and chose peace over violence. The farmer who planted seeds in scorched earth, trusting they would grow. The lovers who promised forever despite knowing nothing lasts. The artists who created beauty in the midst of horror. The rebels who fought tyranny even when victory seemed impossible. Pandora's jar had released suffering, yes, but it had also revealed something fundamental about the human spirit: its capacity to endure, to persist, to find light even in the deepest darkness. The jar itself was lost to time, buried or destroyed or hidden away, but its contents, both the horrors and the hope, remained woven into the fabric of human existence. Every person born would inherit both the curses and the cure. Zeus had wanted to punish humanity for accepting Prometheus's stolen fire. He had succeeded, but in doing so, he had also given them the tools to survive anything, even the wrath of gods. Pandora herself faded into legend, her story told and retold around those fires that still burned in every human hearth. Some versions painted her as a villain, the woman who damned the world through weakness. Others saw her as a victim, a weapon wielded by gods against innocent mortals. But perhaps the truth was simpler. She was human, curious, fallible, manipulated by powers beyond her understanding, and ultimately the accidental liberator of the one thing that would allow humanity to face every horror the gods could devise. The box was opened. The evils were released. Hope remained, and humanity, armed with fire and fortified by defiance, would survive. Thank you for joining us in this tale of curiosity, catastrophe, and the stubborn light that refuses to die. If Pandora's story resonated with you, hit that like button, subscribe for more myths that challenge everything we think we know, and tell us, is hope humanity's greatest gift or its cruelest curse? But if you think opening a box unleashed chaos, wait until you hear about the night Zeus descended as a golden shower, seduced a mortal queen, and fathered a son whose strength would shake Olympus itself. A child born of divine lust and destined for 12 labors that would test the very limits of mortal endurance. The birth of Heracles, a story of gods, monsters, jealousy, and the hero who was never meant to survive. The greatest hero ever born is about to enter the world. Will you witness his beginning?